Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're still waiting on one of our panelists, but she may show up a little late, and it's fine. But we're going to go ahead and start. Is this for now? It is. Okay, good. All right, so this is our careers panel, and this is largely an opportunity for all of you to talk to some people who have kind of been through what you've all been through in terms of grad school, postdocs, and trying to make a decision about where you end up in this academic or non-academic world that you find yourself in. And so I'm going to start by just asking all of the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about where they are and how they got there. And we'll go from there.
Okay. Hi, I'm Anisha. Let's see, where did I start? I got my undergrad degree in engineering, but then I realized that aerospace engineering was kind of boring to me. So I worked for a couple of years as an RA in a neuroimaging lab at MIT. And that's kind of where I got started in this like open source, open science kind of idea, which was really cool. And then I did my PhD at UCSF, UC Berkeley. And my lab was based at UCSF. It was a neuroimaging for multiple sclerosis lab. And while there, my final year, I was at the right place at the right time. And I met two people that were entrepreneurs. And they were like, hey, we're starting a company for multiple sclerosis care management. Would you like to join? And I was like, no, because I'm an academic. So I came here to UW. I was Ariel's first postdoc at the eScience Institute, and I was doing more neuroimaging, big data. And then I realized my postdoc, it was wonderful, but it had to end. So I eventually made my way back to this company, which was now about 15 people joined, and I've been there for almost 4 years.
Here. Tell us who you are and where you are and how you got here.
Great, yeah, thank you so much. I'm sorry I'm late. I literally walked right past the building and got lost. My name is Angela Fang. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology. I have been assistant professor for 6 years, so I went up recently for promotion. I moved here during the pandemic in 2020. I was previously at Mass General Hospital, Harvard Medical School, doing my clinical internship. So my PhD is in clinical psychology. I went to Boston University. I graduated early in 4 years, 4+1, the +1 being the clinical internship you match for. And then I got matched at MGH, where I stayed on as faculty after that. I did my internship postdoc, and then I stayed as faculty. So my whole life has been in the New England area. I wanted so crazy that I moved out here. But it's been lovely, and the department has been super supportive. Happy to talk about that clinical trajectory and how I decided more to go into the research realm. But I would say the single thing that probably got me here is my interest in research, and getting funding to support myself throughout my training has enabled that. So otherwise, without that funding, I think I probably wouldn't be here.
Hi everyone, Jose Hernandez. I'm currently a data and applied scientist at Microsoft. And how did I get there? It's an interesting story. So I got my PhD here at the University of Washington in the area of measurement statistics through educational psychology department. And then I knew that I didn't want to do the faculty kind of route. And so it was in kind of applied stats, quantitative methods. And so that's when 2015 was around when data science was like, oh, that's like the next field. And so I was like, oh, I think I could do that maybe. And so I actually, I don't know if you've heard of Insight Data Science. That's okay. So I did Insight Data Science. So it's like, I knew that I needed to translate my PhD grad school skills to what industry would want to kind of hire as a candidate. And so that program was great. It was really instrumental in doing that. And so I didn't go into industry right away. I actually went into nonprofit sector doing data science for a year. And then I was hired by Ariel actually here at eScience Institute as a data scientist. And so there it was actually a really awesome pleasure. We were just talking about how we loved it, and I miss it sometimes because we were able to work on a variety of projects from different domains. We had the technical skills we can apply them across different domains. So that was invaluable into and I kind of hone in on a lot of skills that I never thought I would be able to kind of touch, because if you're like in a specific area of your program or PhD program, it's very specific to what you're doing. So I was like doing a lot of causal inference stuff in my PhD, but now I was doing like signal processing stuff and large language model stuff, NLP, and so that kind of helped me have a wide variety of skill sets that I can then communicate to like industry and be hired at Microsoft.
Hi, everyone. I think I know most of you from today, but I'm Elizabeth. I'm probably the earliest in my career journey of everyone on this panel. I'm providing the postdoc perspective. So I'm currently a postdoc. I work at Stanford. In terms of my trajectory, I think one thing that maybe is sort of interesting is I did my undergrad in pure psychology. I had very little statistics, no computer programming background at all. And then I went and did a master's in cognitive neuroscience, started to get a little bit more of each, did my PhD actually with JB, really focusing on neuroinformatics. And then I decided for my postdoc that I really wanted more intensive training in kind of the quantitative work as well. So I got really lucky in that I'm in a program that explicitly is geared toward interdisciplinary work. So my primary mentor is Russ, who many of you have met, and my secondary mentor is actually a statistician. So I go between a psychology and a statistics lab day to day, which I think has been really, really valuable. So I'm happy to talk about kind of the paths that you can take as you figure out along your degree, if you want to change focus or narrow focus in that way.
Thank you. And I intuit from what I'm seeing online that we may have not told everyone online what the right room was to be in. So apologies if you just logged in because you didn't know where to be. You haven't missed much. We just introduced the panelists. At this point, we'd like to open it up to questions from all of you. The point of this panel is so that you all can talk to some people who have, made some, been through the process of deciding where to end up, going through academia, deciding whether to end up in academia or industry. And so please, if you have a question, raise your hand. Oh, okay. I will bring the microphone back.
Yeah, thanks for the introductions. I was wondering if you have any insight or like from your experience, what are like your lessons learned in terms of, let's say I am ending my PhD soon and I want to decide where I want to go. And a lot of factors play in, as in if you have a partner, where that person is working. So from your perspective, now that you already are probably in a more established place, how did you do it, or how would you have done it if you could have had the choice? How would you decide whether it's the city or is it the position that you think is more important? Yeah, maybe just some opinions on that would be insightful.
I'm happy to comment on that. I might have forgotten to tell you about my research, but I really trained in clinical psychology and anxiety disorders, cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral principles, neurocognitive models, but then got my K award to study neuroscience and study functional neuroimaging in particular. So it was that shift that allowed me to see what working in an academic medical center was like. And I was a small fish in a very big pond at the Martino Center, wrestling with 60 other labs for scan time in the new 3T Prisma scanner that we had. And every single cent of my salary had to be supported by myself. So it was a very difficult environment to sustain a future in. Every position I ever held at Mass General was funded by myself or through clinical hours. I could not see a future seeing patients all day. I realized I actually had a limit with that. I was interested initially in medicine and also in neuroscience. But that aspect of clinical psychology was not spelled out for me when I started. So for me, the decision came down to very much a lifestyle decision and moving to a hard money position where my money is funded by tuition and teaching was that trade-off I made, because in this whole journey too, I realized that I couldn't conceive naturally and my family planning was delayed. I needed fertility treatment. I now have 2 sons that I got through fertility treatment. And maybe about a third, God help me, but that is actually, that was pivotal in deciding to move to Seattle, even though it was very far away from everybody, because the resources they offered me here were something I had never heard of. I was told at MGH I needed to get 3 R1s to support a lab for myself. And it was just a life I couldn't see, so.
Yeah, I'm gonna hop on the kid train here. They're a really big deal. Like, they completely upend your life and make you a completely new person. So for me, actually, I work remote from San Diego because my parents are there. And so we actually in the pandemic moved 2 miles away from them. And now I can't be anywhere else. I loved Seattle. I was so sad to leave here. I initially left here because my husband had a job in San Francisco and they wanted him back. And so moved to San Francisco, and so I started my job at Optiv. And then 5 months in, the pandemic started, I was pregnant, I also went to fertility clinic. Like, yeah, life is so much more than just your career. So it is important that you're happy in other aspects, and kids just take up like, I don't know, 99% of my brain right now. I'm like proud of what I've done in my career, but I'm like really proud that I like pushed 2 kids out. And they're like still alive and thriving. So yeah.
Yeah, because 2 kids. But I'll add for me, just thinking that one thing that has always been kind of important in the decision making is the economics of kind of where I live, or can I afford to have 2 kids and all that, and my partner also works, and so that is a conversation. Like, first gen, we don't have a lot of resources, so we gotta figure out, we're helping out family members and all that. So I think for me, it's always been economics is a driver, but also like I want to do work that I enjoy and that I love. That's also part of it. So I think you can have all of that as well, but maybe one outweighs the others in different times, right? So maybe my next career move will not be mostly economics based. It'll be like some other factor.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo that. I think that I've been exceptionally lucky in a lot of ways in that I have a partner. We've been together for a long time. We made a lot of career decisions so we could stay together. And we've always had opportunities to do that. That's been something that's been afforded to us. So we've been really lucky, but it is really one of those things where you do have a life outside of work, and that like you need to eat, you need to have a place to live. There are situations where I know postdocs will get an award and maybe it actually really isn't enough to cover cost of living where they want to be if they want to live close to campus or something like that. So I think if you're thinking about a position, be it a postdoc or something else, having that kind of like clear-eyed view of, can I really live here? In a sense of not just can I stand in this room and do science, but also, can I go to the grocery store and pay rent and everything else is something that's really, really important. And good advisors, if you're looking at academic positions for a postdoc in particular, or research scientist role, good departments, good advisors, they'll be explicit about that and try and support you. And there are very supportive environments that will do those things, but asking about that, I think, is something that's really important and easy to get lost when, I think maybe this is a general point, like my husband works in tech and he talks a lot about the importance of negotiation. And I think that we who, are usually in academia don't think about that side of things at all. We kind of are here like, oh, I have this amazing chance to work with this amazing faculty, and I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna make it work. And, you know, in the best case scenario, you do, and things work out well, but that isn't a given. And so I think that it's important to say, okay, this is an amazing offer. I'm so excited about it. What does it really look like for my day-to-day? What is it gonna look like for my budget? Where am I gonna live? How am I gonna put things together? I think being very explicit about those asks is something that, well, as you get to the end of the PhD and you think about next positions, no matter what the position is, knowing those numbers can make things a lot easier.
No, I was just gonna hand it to you.
And by the way, people on Zoom, please, I can't see if you're raising your hand or anything, so shout out if you want to ask a question.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing. I wanted to ask about more about looking for postdoc positions. At what point in your PhD, or in our PhD, would you suggest starting to actively look for them? And if there are any tips or things that we should think about before we even start, in terms of how we direct our own research or what we do in our PhD.
You're the postdoc.
There's several companies postdocs as well. Maybe I can get the most recent perspective and then we can get some like time honed perspectives on that. I would say that I think one, knowing that you want to do a postdoc is an important thing, because I think for a lot of people, there's sort of a train that people get funneled into where it's like, oh, well, the next step is a postdoc, so I will do a postdoc. And then when it ends up as a postdoc's just another couple of years, where maybe the numbers don't play as nicely, is something that you could go on and do. So first, just being really cognizant of that you want to do a postdoc, and therefore saying, what do I want to do a postdoc in? Do I want to learn a new skill? How do I get to a place where I can do that? Do I want to, you know, learn deeper about something I already know with a new topic area with a different faculty? Who are the faculty that I should connect to around that? If you have those frames coming in, that makes the conversation easier for sure. In terms of timing, I know people who've done, you know, all manners of things. I know people who like 2 years out were like, I'm going to start contacting people, then a year out, we'll write funding applications together. I know people who've been like, oh, it's the last 6 months, like I need to figure out something now, or 3 months, whatever. Like there's some flexibility there. In general, I would say that, so in my case, for example, I confirmed where I wanted to do a postdoc about a year out, and we wrote some funding applications together and submitted those, and that's what I got for the interdisciplinary thing I'm in now. I think that's a quite nice model, because the other nice thing it brings, if you have the luxury of that timing, is that when you have your own money, you're in a much more independent position. So to the extent that you can have your own funding as a postdoc, it gives you the opportunity to say yes, no, maybe, and focus on those frames you're interested in, versus if you don't, it's not a problem in many cases, but there are some environments where advisors will be like, oh, you're on this grant, you can really only work on this grant. And if that aligns with your interest, great. If it doesn't, it's something to know before you start. So a year-ish, so you can think about money, is something I'd advise.
I can do a postdoc.
I'm gonna echo what Elizabeth said. I actually wasn't sure what I was gonna do. I didn't even know I was in my final year of my PhD. Ariel contacted me. He was like, hey, look at this cool funding opportunity. You'd be a good fit. I could be your mentor. And I was like, so I applied and I got it. And then 6 months later, it was June, and I was like, hey, advisor, I got this postdoc starting in September. Are you gonna deny me my degree? And it was like, no, of course not. So, you know, obviously I was qualified, I was ready to graduate, but like, it was kind of that like kick in the butt that I needed to get me like out, because I didn't want to not do my postdoc. My postdoc was great. I think that probably look for cool funding opportunities so that you can have your own funding, because then you're like a free bird, you have all these cool ideas, and it's a really fun time.
I think my answer is a little different because I had a clinical degree. Is anyone interested in clinical aspects? Okay, so Yeah, the train that you're put on, I very much resonated with that, but I'm also someone that likes that planning. And so when I couldn't have kids, when I wanted to have kids, I have to say it was the most frustrating thing. It's like, I can't just work harder at it. You can't have more sex, you know, like it just doesn't work that way. But I did like the aspect of, you know, a grad school, internship, postdoc, and because I knew I was gonna get licensed, that the statewide regulations dictated whether I needed a postdoc. I don't know why I'm looking at you, but that kind of made the decision for me. But I think I'm also someone that is easily fascinated by so many different fields and how they converge. And so that's why the idea of getting a K award that supported training in neuroscience is an area that I've always wanted to explore, but didn't have the support and resources to do that, was so appealing to me. And that single-handedly helped me decide to do the postdoc. And then I think the question I hear more is how long to stay in the postdoc, because the other caveat I'll say about that is that I did my postdoc for 16 months on purpose because that was the absolute minimal I needed in order to get licensed. I wasn't going to be a private practice clinician or work in practice settings. So I just wanted enough to be able to supervise and to do maybe a little, I still see one patient a week just because that's my end user for my science. I don't want to forget that. And I think that's very unusual for people who go fully academic. I think in my work where we intersect with so many different kinds of people, I want to remember that my training is in providing help for the person sitting in front of me. And so that's why I've made that very careful decision. And I wanted to get the hell out of postdoc as soon as I could. The NIH cap for postdoc salaries last I checked when I was applying was $45,000. And I remember thinking, why would I stay and apply for an F-32 when a K award starts at 90,000? And I was like, oh, I'm going to be competing against people who are fully established labs who are 8 years out of their PhD. There's no way I can get a K award. I applied for my K award with very good advice from advisors in my internship here so that it was funded during postdoc. So I was only 2 years out of my PhD. And it made me go from a $25,000 stipend to postdoc where you get 45,000, 40,000 maybe, to 90,000 within a matter of 3 years. And then I also applied for the NIH loan repayment program because I'm also first PhD in my family, and I got all of my undergrad loans paid off by the NIH. So that's another way to strategically navigate that landscape, should you decide to do academia, because that was a whole nother decision. I think your decision to do academia postdoc is not a small decision.
I have a question about your guys' advisors. It sounds like you've kind of been through this long path. So any and all advisors, mostly I want to know like what your relationships with them are like or were like, and or your boss at industry. And if like how supportive they were basically, and if they weren't supportive or you wish they did something more, what that was, and then also what sources of like support you went to find to supplement that.
I'll just gently remind everyone, this will be posted to YouTube. If you have questions that are on YouTube, we can talk.
Oh, yeah, excellent.
Anyone like to start?
Now they know.
No, just-
I can start. My advisor, he knew how to prepare, like, if I wanted to get a faculty job, he would have totally done everything to help me out, but he didn't really have a lot of connections outside of academia. He had some connections in like some research labs and that did kind of more statistics. But yeah, it was a great relationship. He was kind of he was on his way out, like he retired right after I finished. So he wasn't going to conferences a lot. So I had to kind of get that support from other faculty kind of folks that I had connected with. But yeah, I think your advisor or your chair really can help you a lot with your career aspirations, wherever they be, if it's just connecting with folks, that was good enough for me. So, and then I don't think I'm a manager now. My team is unique. My team was started by a faculty economist from UPenn a couple years back. So our group is kind of has an academic feel how we work. It's kind of another lab, I guess. That's the feel that we get. So it's familiar to e-science or academia. So I enjoy that.
My advisors, including Ariel, have been amazing. No, but also no one person knows everything, and you're a really unique individual, and you might have interests that don't perfectly align with your advisors, which is normal. So I think going to conferences, I met Ariel at a conference. I met Elizabeth. So I think just going to as much as you can, I know it's hard with funding and all that, but as much as you can to go to these conferences and socialize and make friends with people that can kind of fill those gaps that maybe your primary advisor doesn't have. I think that's probably the best way to go.
Yeah, I really resonate with that advice too. I think my strategy has always been to look for big labs because the thinking is that they're drawing a lot of expertise from different places to come study that same area. And because generally the big names they're so hands off, they don't know what you're doing. They may not even have run their own analyses, but the farther they are in their own training. I mean, some of the PIs in my area of work, I mean, they're just like so big. They have not seen like, they don't have to handle your implementation question, this stupid little program that you're looking at, right? So my issue was, how am I going to actually get the hands-on training I need? I need that, grad student who's like figuring it out with me, going through discussion boards, I need that postdoc who's been wrestling with the same question, and they're the ones who've been guiding me day to day. So my thinking was always to go to the people, like the big places, Martino's, like the big labs where I can find the people who have the same interests and then are grappling with the same kinds of questions. But I also think my best advising has come from people who weren't my formal advisors. Your relationship with your formal advisor is weird. It's not normal. Like it's academic relationships are just really weird.
What do you mean by that?
Like you just know a lot about them personally. They know a lot about you personally, but they're trying to guide you professionally, and I just don't know any other relationship like that. They're not your parents, but they kind of act like it. It's just, so I think it's just, yeah, I think that's okay for me too.
You don't have to say.
Bad things to say. I was gonna say JB maybe has bad things to say about me, but I don't have bad things to say. No. No, I mean, I would echo broadly what everyone said. I think advisor relationships are weird. Academia has kind of a weird supervisory structure in general, and we ask advisors to do everything. Like from the flip side, if you think about being a young faculty or even an established faculty, having graduate students and postdocs, and it's kind of a weird ask, it's like be their parents but don't be their parents, but like also get grants, but everything else. So I'll say that I've worked with my first PI was like just started his lab that year. Obviously now I'm with Russ, who's very well established, but is one of those rare, very well established PIs who runs all of his own analyses and is just crazy and wonderful. And I mean, GB also knows how to run all of his own analysis and does that. And I've been very lucky to be with people like that. But there is a spectrum, right? There's a spectrum just in terms of the kinds of asks that people have at different points in their careers. And so I think being sensitive to that and also being sensitive to the fact that no one person can do anything and finding their community. The only reason I did take the mic is I want to shout out that, as Anisha alluded to, like, I think finding that community is huge. And I know we at least partially overlapped because of this brain hack community that intersects very strongly with NeuroHack and is a year-round space. So for example, for me, when I first finished my master's degree, or even when I was finishing up my master's degree, I knew there were a lot of things I wanted to learn. I didn't really know where to learn them or how to learn them. I knew my advisor at the time didn't have the expertise to explain them to me, or the time, frankly. And so I was really lucky in that I went to this 2016 edition, NeuroHack OG. And I was really lucky to meet a lot of people here who introduced me to the brain hack community, where there was kind of a year-round series of events to get people training and knowledge and skill sets and introduce them to one another to help fill the gaps that a primary advising relationship can't fill, and even honestly that a lab can't fill sometimes. Sometimes it's just good to get other perspectives. So I would say, yes, things are weird in all academic relationships maybe, but leaning on the community of like the people around, maybe not physically around, but at least online around, who have the same interest set, there's a huge wealth of knowledge there. So I'd also say I got a lot of advising from folks like that, who maybe I don't have a formal relationship with, but hugely impacted my work.
Great, so I'm going to pause and ask anyone on Zoom want to ask a question. I know we're kind of going straight through them, so I'm going to give Zoom people an opportunity to ask now. You've got a question from us. Okay.
So this is a question for folks in industry about sort of your typical day-to-day, what it's like in industry and how that's different from your time in academia.
Yeah, I know.
What was your biggest surprise about that?
Oh, yeah. The easiest one to think about is the amount of time I can spend on a problem or a thing that I'm working on. Well, in academia, even at eScience, we're working on different projects. A lot of these problem spaces are kind of long, like you can spend months trying to figure out how to figure something out. It's more theoretical. In industry, it's kind of, there's this 90% rule where like, if you can get something to 90% done, then that's good, and you move on to the next one. And it's and then so one skill I had to really hone in quickly on was, how do I scope out a problem in a way that I can, that I know that I can either have maybe a week or 2 weeks to think about it and figure it out, versus I have unlimited time to ponder about this problem. So I think that took me some time to kind of get used to it, but luckily my manager and then kind of my skip, the team that I landed on, they, like I said, it's kind of academic feelings, like an academic started the team, and so they're kind of aware, and so it's a good team to land on when you're transitioning from academia to industry. So they were kind of aware. They helped me kind of push me through that, because I could spend a lot of time trying to perfect something. It's like, no, like just move on to the next thing.
Yeah, echoing that, dropping the perfectionism is one of the hardest things for me, and I still struggle with it. I've been in my company for almost 4 years now, and I started as like the 15th employee or something like that, and now they're 85. So the nature of the company has changed a lot. When I first started, it was kind of like my postdoc, but I was paid so much better. And I was like, this is dope. I can do whatever I want. If I have some random idea, I can like just try it out. There aren't that many people you need to convince to do the thing that you want to do. But as the company grows and as you get more funding, you have made certain promises, and you kind of have to stick to them, right? So you can't go, you can go to a conference and you talk to people and you have this amazing idea that you just want to try out real quick, maybe it'll take a couple weeks, maybe a month. What you do is you write it down and then you save it for later. And that can be hard for someone with my personality sometimes, because I'm really impatient. So yeah, so it's an adjustment, but it's been really fun to watch the company grow from really small to like kind of big. Yeah, so.
They're all in kind of different spaces, and so I'm wondering if you or your team are hiring a recent PhD grad, what are, for an open position, like what are 1 or 2 qualities besides funding that you might look for in some potential applicants?
I don't like hiring.
So we're actually hiring me. So I just had a phone screen last week with someone. So yeah, we're actually looking for recent grads, it's actually officially it's an economist position, but we're actually looking for anyone that has good technical skills. And the main thing is, can they communicate those technical skills to like non-technical folks? Like that's kind of one of the biggest barriers for it. That was a barrier for me early on, and that's a barrier for a lot of folks that are just finishing up. And so, yeah, that's one thing. And then, yeah, can you talk about your research in a way that you can communicate it to a wide variety of folks? Like that's important. Like my screener is not about like, let me have you code or anything. I mean, that we'll do that later, but in the first screen with me is just, can you talk about your research? I'll dig deep into what you're working on, and if you can explain it to me, and if I'm not in the domain, then that's a plus, essentially.
Yeah, we have an open position for neuroimaging person. So when I say that, I mean, it would be nice to hire someone with a neuroimaging skill set. So for that particular position, I am looking for like someone probably with the experience that like all of you have. How to actually find these jobs. I actually had someone reach out to me. She'd never really met me before. Actually, she met you. Yeah, she met you, and then she just like randomly messaged me on LinkedIn, and it's kind of hard to find someone with industry experience with a neuroimaging skill set. So she had that, and so I was like, yeah, I'll talk to you, and we actually did give her an offer, but then she chose something else, which was sad, but it's okay because we're going to find a great fit. So for that particular position, I am looking for domain expertise, at least on the technical side of processing neuroimaging data, because that's kind of part of what my company does. So I feel like I should give context. My company is a multiple sclerosis care management company. So we have one team dedicated to processing MRI scans of people with MS. And so that is neuroimaging, image segmentation, a lot of things that you guys are probably familiar with. We have a whole group dedicated to measuring proteins in the blood serum that are related to MS progression and inflammation. So that is a completely different skill set, right? I mean, I've never really pipetted before, but the data science aspect of that is, I think, something that's very transferable. So for that, it would be nice to hire someone with domain expertise, but it's not like a required thing. I feel like neuroimaging is very, I don't know, DICOM images, you guys, they're so weird. And like, we have all sorts of like weird problems with them. And so it's nice to hire someone who's like dealt with it before. But for, you know, biomarker, protein biomarker stuff, maybe not as relevant. And I've kind of transitioned over to that team recently. So it's been really fun to learn something new. We also have part of our company dedicated to analyzing insurance claims to find patients that we think might be at risk for disease progression. And so maybe we can help intervene. So that type of analysis is very cool because it's dealing with like millions and millions of rows, and the technology skills that you need for that is like PySpark and SQL and stuff that honestly is kind of over my head. I probably not a good fit for that, but someone who actually also came to the first NeuroHackademy, her name's Keshi Jordan. She went from her postdoc to a health insurance company where she learned to analyze this type of data. And so when this position opened, I was like, hey girl. So she came, and so she's just like the master of this insurance claims data. And then we have another part of the company dedicated to sensors and wearables and an app where our patients record their symptoms, do like PROs, maybe one day like cognitive tests. That would be pretty cool. So for that, I think a little bit of domain expertise would be nice. So we've hired someone who has a lot of experience doing time series analyses. So it really depends when it's such a wide company. But overall, for a data science position, I am looking for a certain set of technical skills. Reproducibility is super important. Being able to explain your ideas clearly, especially to non-data scientists, is very important. We do a technical screen, which is pretty basic, but it's probably kind of scary at the time because it's like live coding, and I'm like, do bootstrapping, you know? And so it can kind of be a little scary. So I don't know, kind of rethinking that. Maybe a take home. I don't know.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, I hope that answered. Huh?
Do you let them use it?
No, apparently while I was on maternity leave, one person used Chat GPT. Which we didn't hire them, but like it is resourceful. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add to that, except to say that The hiring is done as a group in the faculty and the Department of Psychology, and for clinical psychology, there's different things to think about because they're also patient facing and, you know, getting licensed and whatnot. But the one thing I will say is that I do like the way we hire, which is that I don't have a model of a lab that has done it in this way, but I basically don't want to train anyone to just be me and just be a replica of me. I actually look for people who don't look like me at all, both physically in terms of like my own social demographic identities, but also in terms of my training background. And so as a result, I now have a lab where I have people who've studied animal electrophysiology before coming in, people who've processed EEG, stuff that I have not done before, people with computational backgrounds, and they teach me. And so I think as a group, we're greater than the sum of our parts. And I think they learn to then be the master of their domain, and they learn what I can offer and what I can't. And so I think we have kind of a different hiring philosophy in that respect, but I kind of think that's where we're heading in terms of needing to train the next, the best clinical scientists for the future, so.
I realize I'm not on the panel, but I'm just going to add that if any of you have an opportunity as a grad student or postdoc to sit on a hiring committee, a lot of departments will let you do that, or will let you volunteer. You can learn an awful lot about what matters to the people hiring through that experience. Anyway, more questions here.
Thank you all for everything that you shared so far. So I have a question. Could you maybe share some of the turning points that you've had during your academic career in terms of either mindset, methods, or maybe mentorship that help you feel satisfied or happy with what you've done during your PhD or master?
I'll start since I didn't speak last time. Yeah, so I think that it's hard. I think it's sort of hard in general in any career path, probably, in that when you look back, things always make sense. But when you're at the beginning, nothing makes sense. You know, things just sort of happen to you, and then you're like, oh, this, you know, this was a good thing or a bad thing. We do have some control over that, of course, which is, I think, lucky in many ways that you can choose various things you're interested in. But a lot of times the choices just sort of happen. So I'll say that for me, for example, I came in very interested in health and psychology. My parents are both physicians, and I knew I didn't want to do that. But I wanted something that, you know, had an emphasis on people without patient interactions. So I was really interested in psychology, not the clinical side. And so that's how I ended up where I started. But what I found over my training was that I really wanted to ask questions that I couldn't find a method to support the question I wanted to ask. I basically wanted to work with really high dimensional data, naturalistic data, you know, long time series data. And it was nothing in my training had equipped me to ask those questions. And I recognized through opportunities like this and other ones that I just needed more time and more upskilling, really. I remember when I left NeuroHack in 2016, I was like, oh my gosh, there are so many things I don't know. And that's great, because now I know what I need to go learn, you know? So I took that and I started to work with JB, and I think a lot more explicitly about the tooling and the statistics. And then from that experience, I was even more like, okay, now I want to go start, you know, not only using all these tools, but making some of my own. And so I think that that for me has been kind of a consistent theme of I've had these interests, and the interest has morphed over time, but recognizing the gap between what I wanted and what I could do was something that drove a lot for me. And I think is one of the nice things about this kind of space, because, you know, sometimes there's some things where it's like, oh, I don't have those skills, I guess I just can't ask that question. And sometimes that's true, it depends, but I think there's many cases where you can use it as an opportunity to gain new skills or seek out opportunities to give future skills, and then take those to wherever, you know, wherever your next thing is, either continuing with that question or finding another role that leverages those skills you have.
So, yeah, the turning point, I think, yeah, I agree with Elizabeth. I went to OHBM hackathon in, I think it was Hawaii, and that's where I met Ariel, and I was like, oh, this is a cool person. I met a bunch of other cool people there. And I think it kind of helped me get thinking about, the efficiency of science. I was an engineer by training, and I'm also like an impatient person, as I said before. So just the fact that, I mean, we look at I feel like there's so many inefficiencies to science, right? And so rather than maybe focusing on my biological question, which I probably should have done, I kind of switched gears to think about, well, how can I process this data more efficiently, be accurate about it, and do it quickly, do it reproducibly. And so those were the types of questions that I was asking instead of like the MS specific questions I probably should have been asking. But I was really lucky again because of this postdoc opportunity here, where it was a data science postdoc. And so I was so lucky to get that funding because I was like, I also applied for one of those NIH ones, T something.
Like the T32.
T32. I actually did get it, which was like miraculous because I really didn't think I would. But because, yeah, it was more of a like straight science question versus the efficiency of science question. And so that really like excites me. And so that's why I'm happy in industry, I think, because like they really value efficiency, time is money.
Yeah, I think the academic route really tests whether you want to do this. And everywhere you hear messaging about how you're not good enough or you're not productive enough. And so it's like, why do I continue to choose a career that gives me that kind of messaging, right? Like you're judged by, I just went up for tenure, my H factor was there, and like external letters are being collected. And sometimes you just lose sight of why you're in this. Yeah. And I think when I decided to apply, I had to apply twice. I really made the conscious decision that if I was going to do this, it was going to make my life better. And it only did because it encaptured everything in my life. And by that, I mean, not just kids, but I think with everything going on in the world at the time when I got my faculty position, I really had to evaluate, why am I in this field that continues to neglect marginalized populations in my work? And I'm totally part of that system. And academia perpetuates the system in so many ways. And it made me completely reevaluate, what am I doing? And whether I want to stay in this. And so I think milestones in my life have been moments of like reckoning when I'm just like, oh my gosh, I love this. And I love what I'm doing. I remember seeing patients for 30 hours 1 week in grad school, like between research trials and like therapy, patient facing hours, 30 hours in 1 week. And I was just like, what am I like, what is this? I'm not cut out for this. And that was a turning point. It was another turning point to then go to SOBP and to be like, oh my gosh, this is everything that I've ever wanted to study, and the translational impact that it has on predicting treatment responses and helping patients like actually find the treatments that they should be getting. This is where I want to be. I remember just certain conferences and talks that were really impactful. Having my kids was really impactful. When you're going through fertility treatments, I think you really question like what your purpose is sometimes, and like how much you want something like that. And it made me realize like just how much the science fits in with everything that modern science was able to provide the family that I wanted. So yeah, a lot of things like that come together, but I would really encourage anyone thinking about pursuing science and academia to never believe that if you're serious about your science, you can't move, or that you have to stay, or you have to move geographically really in far places. I think that's a luxury and a privilege that not everyone has, and you absolutely can stay where you are if you want to pursue it, but be guided more by what makes you happy about the science. I love that every day I can study something that I think has meaning for my patients. And even if I come up with more questions, my old ones don't really get answered. It's just so messy sometimes, but I do love that I'm happy where I am now, and that's what matters.
Another question from Slack. Do you encounter the imposter syndrome in the industry too, or is that just in academia?
It goes away.
Oh, you go
Uh,
first.
Yeah, imposter syndrome, at least for me, speaking for myself, it's something that I know will always be there, right? So first step is acknowledging that, like, it's gonna be there. And then I try to use it to motivate me to do, like, to learn things, to do other things. So I don't know, it's kind of a weird relationship that I have, and it's changed throughout grad school and where I am now. But yeah, it's still there. I think that's, for me, it's a reality that I just will always be like, all right, it's like, how do you make it your friend in a way? And just kind of go through life with it. I don't know, I'm okay with that.
So for me, when I started at my company, they had these big dreams about neuroimaging for MS, bringing, translational medicine. And they hired me, and I was the only person who knew anything about like neuroimaging processing. And so I was like, oh no, right? Because like, was I really the best hire here? I mean, like, I'm okay, but like, I don't know. So there was some imposter syndrome there, but then, I don't know, the perfectionism thing, like having to drop that and then being like, okay, I think I know enough to get us to where we need to go. And luckily, my company definitely, like, we consult with academics. So I'm working with some of my former collaborators now, which is nice. So that's made it better. The other thing I've been thinking about for imposter syndrome is at some point I kind of like reframed it as, if someone seems really smart and they're saying things that you don't understand, is it because you are dumb and you don't understand what they're saying? Or is it because they suck at explaining things? Who's the imposter?
That's a good one. I'm gonna use that.
I have another one from Slack. Do you have any advice on how to get involved in open access software development like NeuroImaging and Bits and others? I like to learn about software development and science, but I don't know where I should start from. I know Elizabeth is active in this community. I'd love to hear about your experience. How did you get involved in open source software?
Yes, that's a great question. So I would say that maybe my trajectory was sort of unique, but I think honestly, if you talk to people in open source software, everyone's trajectory is sort of unique in a good way, because there are many different ways in. So I'll say for me, what happened was that I was working with a library known as MICA. If people know this, it's multi-echo independent components analysis. It's for multi-echo fMRI. I was working with this library was originally written around like 2011. I had started working with it in like 2015, and we wanted to make extensions to it, and the code was not designed for that. And the original author who had written the software no longer was really in academia, and he wasn't really supporting the code. And so we got involved in trying to extend and develop it, and really through interacting with people here at NeuroHack and interacting with people at OHBM, really made an effort to make it like a big community project and unify people who were all thinking about this kind of data around a mechanism of working on it. And that was a huge experience for me, just to have the opportunity to be like, oh, I'm going to interact with all these people, and we all have the same goal, we all see the same problem, and we all want to solve it, and we need to figure out how. So that was a really big exposure point just to the power of open source communities. And from there, I got really lucky in that I ended up contributing to fMRI Prep to do their multi-echo processing as it originally existed, which meant learning a lot of NiPipe, which was super fun. I don't know, would you call that NiPipe? Okay, see, there's not consistency here. So I got involved in NiPipe. And fMRI Prep, and then from there it was really lucky in that I worked with JB and Gael, who visited JB for a year, was obviously very instrumental in NiLearn, and so I started to do some work on NiLearn as well, and really enjoyed that. But I will say that my experience is, generally speaking, that there's different ways into open source. I know some folks who just showed up on repositories and submitted pull requests and become hugely integral and even pivotal members of the community. Like that absolutely happens. I'm not that kind of person personally. I don't know that I have the confidence necessarily to just show up to someone's repo and be like, here's a PR that redoes all of these things. So for me, what I usually find is I'll meet people at events and then I'll have a sense of who they are. And then I find it much easier to come and work together. So I think that's another huge benefit of events like this is because once you meet people, once you kind of have a sense of like, oh yes, if I write a message where tone maybe isn't obvious, I can trust at least that we're all good people on both sides of this. Then I think that helps make things a lot easier. So that's a very long answer, but again, I think there are a lot of different ways into open source, including maybe some of the people here could talk about, and I think there's no one right way.
Yeah, I was right place at the right time. My boss, when I was a research assistant, was Dr. Ghosh, who was a NinePipe founder. So it was my job to contribute to open source. But man, even though it was my job, it was still really scary, right? Especially like being a woman, there weren't a lot of me, just around in like computer science. I remember one time in undergrad, I was an aerospace engineer. I was the only girl in my class and no one wanted to be my partner, and it sucked to suck for them because I was coding since age 7. Anyway, sorry. So I'm still very self-conscious, lots of imposter syndrome. And I didn't know like any of the conventions, like how you're supposed to like write the function in the duck string and stuff. I got a lot of feedback, and so that was kind of hard at first. But then yeah, it got better. And now I'm at that state where I'm like looking for some library that does a thing I don't feel like writing, and I get it, and it's like almost there, but there's a bug, and I'll just like send a pull request nowadays to fix it. And if they don't take it, that's fine because I just needed it to work. So now I have a copy of the code with the fix in it. If they want to take it, cool. If not, like that's fine. Yeah.
Just one last thing. Some projects make it really easy to in their repositories, they'll triage like the entry, like things that are, you can proofread their documentation and that's contributing to their project, or you can do coding stuff. So they kind of help you find the entry point, the good ones at least. So that's a good
Yeah, I have
strategy.
one more thing. So I'm a contributor to Scikit-learn because I contributed some documentation.
It's so valuable.
It's so valuable.
But the reason I did it is because they actually had an event in San Francisco where they invited people over, they had food and drink, they taught us like the proper like way of doing the pull request. So it made the learning curve like a lot less intimidating. And so I think that was really great of them. And if you're like in a big city, maybe they'll have an event like that. Just look out for that. And then there's also Hacktoberfest, right? With GitHub, where I think you get like a t-shirt or something. I don't know.
They might still do the t-shirts.
Yeah.
I'll just add, because I think I almost said it, a lot of repositories literally tag good first issues. As good first
Yeah,
issues.
yeah.
Yeah, and so you can go and find those, they'll love it if you just, they're often things they want to bang out, but they don't have time for it, so. Is there a question over here? Yeah.
Thanks for your advice. So I've heard from a few people that are like thinking about leaving academia, that they like really struggle to get that like first position outside of academia and industry. So for the people who are in industry, is there like any tips or anything that you could say about like what's the best way that someone can set themselves up to make themselves look desirable in industry with only having an academic background?
I'll try to condense the, I think it's 10-week, 6-week inside data science program into like a couple sentences. Essentially what the value of that is as graduate students, as PhD students, even master students, you're working on academic projects, and those are products that if you, the way you communicate about your work could be in a way that it's like an actual product that you're working on, that someone in the industry might say, oh yeah, these are different projects. Other things that we did is we did like our own kind of fun project. Now it's kind of easier because there's like Kaggle and all these things. So all of those, even though they're not like, they're not gonna be like you can still have them as projects, but you want to have other things that you did in your academic career. So everything that you do now, there's some projects there that you just need to kind of bring out in terms of how you communicate about them. And there are teams, so like, for example, my team, so not all teams are the same, but some teams, they hire for skills. You might not have a domain expertise. They know that you were in academia, but they know that you know how to do research, you know how to really hone in on a problem and you know how to solve it. So I think at least like my team, my hiring manager was very about, he didn't care that I had no clue what the cloud business was, because I'm in Azure and my work kind of, we figure out the demand for like large language model generative AI, and then like there's a business around it. I had no idea what that was. I just knew what LLMs were and how to use them. So he was like, okay, you understand the technical space and you can learn on the job the other stuff. So there will be teams out there that are looking for the skills and they'll let you learn on the job. So it's about networking, talking to people and kind of finding those positions.
Yeah, I struggle to answer this question because I was really lucky. Like I said, I was at the right place at the right time. But I have been on the other side, right? Like there was that one person who randomly messaged me on LinkedIn and she did end up going through the full interview process and getting an offer. So like maybe that works. It worked, again, N=1, so it's hard, but it worked for one person. That's cool. I think what I did when she messaged me though, is I looked at all the links she provided. So she had like a personal website, she had a GitHub where I could look at her code.
Mhm.
That was really helpful. It wasn't perfect. She probably needed some training. But that I knew that going in and I was like, okay, I'm okay with this, right? Maybe more documentation would be great. Yeah, so maybe like a portfolio or something. If you have, I think like if you want to do data science, being able to communicate is really important. So if your personal website can communicate your science really well, that's cool. Focus on good data visualizations and put that on your website because people might want to see that. That's a really good skill. Yeah, that's my best guess.
Can I steal the mic actually?
As a non-industry person. But I will say one thing just to echo the portfolio piece. I think this actually highlights the strength of open source in some ways, right? Because if you're contributing to open source, you're building that portfolio. If indeed what you're trying to do is show that you have all of these coding related contributions, then contributing to open source allows you to build that over time, not just on your own projects, but on larger projects. Like you can become a scikit-learn contributor, which is really cool. I'm just gonna say. So I think that's a really nice thing. And the other thing too is if you're contributing to open source and you're like, actually, I want to get academic credit, there are avenues for that too. So like I'm an editor for the Journal of Open Source Software right now. And we love, highlighting work that's done to write open source code in an academic context by providing a paper and DOI and going through a review process. So I think that open source is a really nice way to leverage both sides depending on what you want to do. It's always good. But yeah, just in general portfolio, if you don't want, if you don't want a career that's doing a coding skill, if you want to do like science writing, for example, maybe having a portfolio of pieces you've written there, I think having that work built over time is just valuable to point to.
Yeah, I just remember one of the first exercises that we did in Insight was we all came in with our whatever page long CVs, like our PhD graduate work, and they're like, all right, turn it into one page resume. And so I was like, what the heck? But it forced you to kind of think of the project, but what did you contribute to that project and make it into like its own kind of encapsulated product?
I was just gonna add,
In my field, the people that go into industry, which I have some good friends in that space, they go into healthcare pharma. And they are recruited for their scientific rigor. And I think digital tech is a big thing now that apps are being couched under wellness, and so they're not regulated as much by the government. And so some of those companies want to recruit clinical psychologists who have the scientific background to evaluate trials, evaluate whether an intervention works. And so I think to the degree that you can show your scientific rigor in the form of publications or be able to like falsify your hypotheses is a practice I think that people maybe are not as familiar with, like being able to show other ways of confirming support for hypothesis. Those seem to be traits that my peers are demonstrating.
Great, okay, more questions.
One more question from Slack, for Jose. How does working at a large scale company like Microsoft compare to your experience at the nonprofit, or the pros and cons of company size ethos that you've noticed?
It's on YouTube, right? Yeah, it's like night and day. I think, let's see, Microsoft, it's huge, but it's really, the teams are really siloed. So like the cloud and AI group is like, it's a big group, but they kind of focus on one thing, and then there's other software teams. So it's definitely, this is big, so a lot of things can move slow, and so I kind of dealt with that a little bit. And also like the career trajectory is, I guess it's kind of cloudy in a lot of places, but it's different there. Each team is different. Depending on what level you come in, and getting to the next level is not as clear. So you really have to like ask your, communicate with your manager and his manager or his or her manager, and figure out like, how do you navigate this space? So I think it's so big that it is harder to navigate. At least for me, it's been hard. So I've been trying to find mentors and people that are kind of have been there for a long time. Luckily, people are really open to giving advice about how that works. And the nonprofit it was really small, so it was different. We're working on very specific kind of problems. So that was actually a really good experience too, because I was collaborating with a lot of government organizations here in Washington, and they had a lot of data problems, and we were kind of the first folks to help them out with their data and figure out how to help them kind of fix the things that they were trying to fix. So yeah, it's like night and day, definitely. Yeah, it doesn't compare. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of trying to think right now, like what's the biggest difference? It's probably just the size. Yeah, like there's so many layers at Microsoft, and I'm still trying to learn. I've only been there for a little bit over a year, so I'm still relatively new, and so I'm still learning like how to navigate Microsoft. I didn't say anything bad. I didn't see YouTube.
So I have a quick question. Oh, sorry, we got other questions. Hold on.
Hi, for those of you that are first gen, how did you feel the environment changed, or was it the same in academia versus industry? Like, even in academia, there's like minority URM students. And so slowly that's, I feel like, starting to change. Do you think it was the same in industry or worse? How's that like environment?
I think, let's see. I think like at Microsoft, for example, they have a lot of internal initiatives to help people find community, like first gen, and any community that you want to find, they have. And so you kind of, I guess there's an easier way to find that. But with that said, it's still corporate, right? It's like corporate America, it's Microsoft. So a lot of that is just what you would expect at a big corporation, right? Like it's not, it could come off as just PR stuff, or so anyhow, I'm always been critical about that space regardless, but I do try to find community because it's important. So then there are ways to find that industry, and I think other big corporations kind of all have ways to find community like that. In academia, it was also it was hard, but same thing, like you would find ways to find communities. There's programming that helps you do that as well. So I think both have avenues to do that, and you can find community and you can still be critical about it, be in this space. So like I think, yeah, just being comfortable with that, or just knowing that, I guess it's what I think about all the time.
Yeah, got a simple one. What advice would you give to early or first year PhD students?
Okay, fine, fine. I always pass it up to you. I remember. I was really anxious my first year. I had no idea what I was doing. I was really stressed out about the whole like grant writing thing. I didn't get funding, right? Like I didn't get the, what is it called? I don't even remember anymore.
NSF.
The NSF one, and then there's like empty seg, and I remember when I first started, I didn't know what lab I was in, and I was super scared of like rotating in a lab, and they didn't have funding for me, and then I didn't get the grant, and I was kicked out. I don't know, that was really pessimistic, so give yourself more credit, maybe, and everyone feels like an imposter, remember the flip of the thing, people suck at explaining things. Maybe that, what else? Oh, the skill set that I think you're learning here at NeuroHackademy is really, really valuable. I think as data sets are growing, and again, I'm all about like scientific efficiency. I think as data sets are growing, the skill set, you know, like Git and Python, it's just so valuable. And so like stick to that. Yeah, even if maybe your local community at your school like doesn't necessarily value that, I think it's definitely worth it. And contribute to open source.
I won't add too much, just be patient with yourself, that's all, like, and be willing to, yeah, go outside of your department or the way they do things and where you're at in your graduate program. So like open source, for example, like maybe they're not doing a lot of that in your program, but you're here and that's actually really valuable and keep doing that.
Say one is find your passion and be open to what that could be. And then two is get the hell out of there. Don't stay. Your dissertation is not supposed to change the world. Each project is not supposed to change the world. Just get out of there. You're just there for training, you know. And then I think it's after you graduate, when you have some autonomy over your life, you actually have a bank account where you can like approve it.
Yeah.
You don't have like your friends are getting like 401ks. You're like, what is that? You know, live your life and start your life and like plan out things that you care about. So
Stop living off of Trader Joe's meals.
Like Trader Joe's.
Yeah,
I still, yeah.
I mean, I don't think I can top that. I think that's right.
Good.
I guess the only other thing I'd say is that I think often, not always, but often when you come into a degree program, it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to be a scientist, I'm going to do this, I'm going to figure it out myself. And I think we tend to underutilize the resources that are available, like your lab mates, and like your department. And, you know, if you're doing a PhD, you'll be there for a few years. It's worth getting to know people. It's worth to spend time. I've talked to people a lot where they're like, I want to learn this language, you know, but I'm the only person in the lab. And you can do that. You absolutely can. I've done it. It works. But also it helps to be able to work with your lab mates. So spending the time and building those connections, like definitely get out when you can, but also while you're there, try and enjoy the people, because I feel like, you know, the skills will come and the connections are what will definitely last too.
I feel like so many things in academia and graduate school depend on funding. And like all the time, I feel like there's like so many fellowships and like grants that are available out there, and then how to be strategic about like when to apply to them, or like which ones to keep in mind, and then when to plan to apply, and then in going into postdoc, like which ones to apply to, and then yeah, like how to seek those opportunities, be strategic about that.
yeah, I wish everyone consistently displayed, uploaded their failure CV, because the number of shots on goal you need to get in order to get the hits is actually a really important number. So that denominator, right? And I think for early career though, what's so important is getting early success, because what I experienced was I applied for like 7 things in grad school, I didn't get a single one. And it's like, why do you continue to do this thing that like continues to not work? But you have to have like faith in your ideas. If you don't, no one else will. And I think half of writing a good grant is figuring out the mechanism. It just might not be the right mechanism. So a lot of the time before I even write anything, it has to do with what are the past proposals that they funded, does it match? If there's no match, I don't even bother. And then part of it is just what's worked in the department, what's worked for people who've had similar questions. So it's a lot of stalking people's CVs online. What grant is this? That's the question, that's a similar question. I need to look into this. So half of it, the grantsmanship is even before you start the grant. So I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, again, I can only really echo that. I think, having trained in the US and in Canada, and I'm sure in many other countries that I haven't seen this in, it's also true, like the funding mechanisms are just so different depending on your environment. And the kinds of opportunities that are going to be available are different. So I think looking around for what people who you work with or will work with have done, what they have found successful, sometimes you can just ask them. Like, for example, the grant I'm on right now, I had never heard of because it's internal to Stanford. But when I first started talking to Russ about funding options, he was like, oh, we should apply to this one. It's new, it seems good. And it worked out and it's been great. So I think sometimes you can just ask people. Sometimes it is a little bit of like, okay, research, what are people finding? But I definitely think that the strategy is in being conscious about it and thinking about like, okay, I'm approaching this milestone, like what are the next X years going to look like? And where will the money come from to do that? And I think, becoming comfortable with the grant writing process as a skill. I think that's one thing too, like we don't necessarily, some programs do teach it, so I shouldn't say we don't teach it, but often grant writing is not taught. And it is very different from the kind of writing that you would do in a paper. It's very different from the kind of writing that you would do, to a colleague in an email. It's a very specific skill. It just takes time to learn. I think that's part of the CV of failures is like you have to just learn how to write grants for whatever agency. And then when you get a new agency, you learn it again. But it becomes faster and faster each time. And so I think putting in the hours, putting in the time, that makes a huge difference.
So what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out with GitHub? Because it seems a bit intimidating to me. To obviously to start immediately contributing to open source. You want to like build up your portfolio because I've seen so many good portfolios before, and I'm not sure like how people started because I usually see those nice portfolios or nothing. So I never see this like intermediate kind of GitHub. So yeah, do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, good. Back to the imposter thing. I've seen some terrible code on GitHub. Just so you're only looking at the good stuff, but there's also terrible stuff. And I remember when I first started here, I was like reading a paper on CNNs, and I had no idea. Like I'd never done this before, and I saw this paper I read. I wanted to replicate what they did on the brain, and I remember I went on their GitHub, and they had no functions anywhere, right? But they were like fancy like computer science lab. I was like, this is wild. So maybe the first step is the hardest. Just put something up there. You can start maybe with your personal website. That way you have something. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm not from the art science side. The first GitHub thing I did, I think was through like software carpentry or something.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, that was like I don't remember what year it was, but it was 3 science way before I even knew what e-science was. But yeah, it was essentially a workshop on how to do Git, how to use Git and GitHub, and that was my first repo that I had, and then GitHub still is kind of crappy, but because at work we use kind of internal stuff, but anyhow, that's how it started, and then you just keep adding things to it eventually. Like I think for NeuroHackademy, I think you do have.
You started.
Yeah, you already have something, right? And it's like, so that's kind of, you start, and then like Anisha said, you just keep adding things to it.
Yeah, I think start somewhere is always the critical piece, right? Like just do it and, you know, it's out on the internet. And I think the other thing to know then is that, you know, it sort of depends how you want to use GitHub, right? Because I think as this year you saw with the tutorials, there's Git for version control and there's GitHub for collaboration. And I know many scientists who spend their whole careers just in Git for version control. And so they upload the code and it supports the work, and that's totally fine. I just think it's really cool if you also do GitHub for collaboration, where you're actually engaging with other people and engaging with the social aspect of science and software, because I think that gives you a lot more. And so then in that case, you get the extra benefit of just saying like, finding a good first issue on a repo and being like, hey, I'd like to add some documentation here. Here's what I think. Or like, hey, I saw this error. Could we fix this? Or, you know, starting those conversations, I think hugely benefits the kinds of things you can do down the line. Because if you just come in and you're like, you know, I just want to do this one thing, then people know who you are. They know that you can, you know, work on GitHub, and then you can be like, all right, I want to add this new feature. I want to talk about this design decision. I want to get more involved. I think all of those things are super accessible, but you don't need to start at like, here's a major API change. You can just start at like, here's a typo I found, and that's super valuable.
Okay, so the phone call just ran out, so to take was the pizza delivery person. So we'll do one more question.
I had a question about bridging clinical experiences and like working with the interdisciplinary team. So whether you're working with a clinician or just being a clinician yourself, and like bridging the gap between science and clinical work.
I'm just like,
Anything in particular about that? Because there's so much I could say.
I think like just in the like spirit of open source, where a lot of clinicians are not having the data science background of being able to like communicate across the like research side. So how do you do that when you're both in a way? And also
It totally changes the game. You've got to run stats differently sometimes, because like linear regression might not be as interpretable as logistic regression. They need to have meaningful outcomes. Like they don't know what % signal change is. They don't know what bold is. They need to understand what is a measurable unit that can tell me, like in finding biomarkers, they need to find something that they can actually hang their hat on that has consistency, reliability, validity. So you need to talk in a different language a little bit. And also they see such heterogeneous people. You're not just talking when I tell them I work with OCD, they're thinking, oh, someone who washes their hands a lot. No, there's a whole ton of other kinds of OCD. There's some types of OCD that are psychotic. There's types of OCD that are more depression. It's so heterogeneous. And I think sometimes the people on the basic science side know only about disorders from a very book place, like they memorize these stereotypes of what these disorders are. And much in the actual clinical, in the real world clinics, people just don't come so neatly packaged like that. And our disorder categories just don't do a good job of just delineating between people and the underlying etiology and the causal mechanisms that are driving those disorders. So it's you've got to change the way you talk. So I think the science communication that's been emphasized with industry is huge. But that makes you a better scientist anyway. Like everyone should be thinking about that, right? And then I think on the flip side, to talk to basic scientists, you also have to explain just the heterogeneity and the variability, the sources of variability that are going to be in your signal. Like you think fMRI signal processing is already a nightmare. No, wait until you scan a clinical patient, right? Like they're having a panic attack while they're running the scan. I've had to like save people from that and get them back in the scanner. And you know, it's so much messier, but there's still like really established ways that we're getting further and getting more reliable and valid data. So yeah, I don't know if that helps with that.
I work with a lot of clinicians, a lot of neurologists, And it can be frustrating at times, but it also forces me to be a better communicator because I was a person who sucked at explaining things, right? So it kind of forces me to get better. I also love working with them because everything has to be interpretable. And so it's cool. You have to choose your model specifically so that you can explain it at the end of the day. And you have to remember that they're making potentially like life-changing decisions to like actual people that they see face to face. So while we're off in like science land, maybe like running like a regression, right? And you run regression with like age and like brain volume. And you say, this is the intercept, this is the slopes. And they're like, what's the intercept? And it's like, yeah, like at time 0, this would, then they're like, no, that's not actually true. At time 0, they're a baby, right? So, no, that's not how to explain it. And then, the same with the slope. Let's say you were doing a log scale, right? Little things like changing the axis so it's back to like the actual units of things is so valuable that I never thought about before. But I think about now because it's like these are people making life-changing decisions. They need to understand the model that you're providing them. And so I think it's fun.
I don't have a clinical side of this, but I want to take a spin on your question to just interdisciplinary, because I think that's so critical broadly, like hugely interacting with clinicians, I think is a really clear use case that's hugely valuable. I have been the basic scientist with more methods applied people. I remember I went to this, there's this big institute in Montreal called the Quebec Institute for Learning Algorithms, where everyone's like really into deep learning. They're the deep learning people. And so they had a reading group about neuro AI, and I went and presented a paper that someone else had done. And I was like, this is so interesting. I really like their method for looking at representations. Like, I think it relates really well to blah, blah, blah. And all the people, there's a variety of people in the room, but all the people who were pure deep learning people were just looking at it with like a flat expression. And so I was like, well, what do you do? What methods do you do to look at this? And they were like, we wouldn't look at that. Why do we care? We want accuracy values. Like all we care about is how well the model performs. We're not going to look inside of it. So I was like, oh no, like my whole reasoning and framing and everything I had brought to the discussion, I was like, I have to rethink it. I have to figure it out. But it makes it it's such a valuable exercise exactly in this way to be like, what is my science really communicating? Why is it important? What does it bring? What is the value of it? I think you can find that sort of interdisciplinary perspective, even if you're not necessarily finding it with clinicians, you can find it in many spaces. And I think it makes the science so much more impactful if you really think through that question.
Okay, so I think that given that we can all smell the pizza now, it's probably time to close the session out. Let's all thank our panelists first of all. So I believe that at least some of our panelists are going to stick around for a while to answer more questions if you have any. I believe we also have an online channel where you can ask questions, and we'll make sure these questions get to them if they're not already on the channel. But thank you all for being here, and have at it.